The chapel in Bone Valley stood proud against the scorching afternoon, its adobe walls gleaming white under the relentless sun. Within, the air hung thick with rosewater, tallow smoke, and nervous whispers. Every wooden bench groaned under the weight of witnesses. Ranchers in their Sunday best, ladies in starched petticoats, shopkeepers with pocket watches gleaming, all gathered to see the union of Marcus Hartwell, wealthy cattle baron, and Sarah Blackwood, child of a family drowning in mortgage debt. Before the makeshift altar, Sarah quaked in borrowed ivory silk. The fabric was worn, the wildflower bouquet wilting in her damp palms. Behind her, her kin sat stone-faced, their desperate hopes pinned to the dowry that would rescue their homestead. Marcus loomed beside her, preening in his costly tailcoat, reeking of expensive tobacco, his cold smile resembling victory more than devotion. The minister's voice boomed. "Do you, Marcus Hartwell, accept this woman as your wedded wife?" Without question, Marcus declared smoothly, as though closing a business deal. "And do you, Sarah Blackwood?" The ceremony shattered. From the vestry came an infant's piercing shriek. Every head swiveled. A young serving woman emerged, cradling a bundled newborn. The child's cry echoed like thunder through the sacred space. Gasps erupted. "Sarah bears a child," someone hissed. "An illegitimate babe," another spat. Sarah's bouquet tumbled to the stone floor. Marcus's expression darkened like storm clouds. "You deceived me," he bellowed. "You think I'll father some drifter's spawn?" "Please, I beg you," her words trembled, lost beneath rising murmurs turning to cruel laughter. Marcus hurled the wedding band at her feet. "There shall be no marriage. Let everyone witness her true nature." The congregation erupted in scandal. Mothers shielded their daughters. Men spoke of disgrace. Sarah's parents hung their heads in shame. Her father rose and departed without acknowledgement. Her mother followed, skirts rustling past their ruined daughter. "Don't leave me," Sarah pleaded, reaching desperately, but they never turned back. Her knees gave way. She collapsed from the altar, pressing the infant to her breast. Tears blurred her vision as condemnation rained down. Deceiver, they called her. She trapped him. The accusations cut like blades. She crumpled at the chapel's base, her sobs lost in the chaos. The baby whimpered, her sole anchor as her world crumbled. Then stillness fell. The voices died. A long shadow stretched across the aisle, spurs rang. Against stone, measured and deliberate. Ezra Stone, the cowpuncher, had lingered near the rear. Silent as always, wide-shouldered and weathered by sun. A man who chose solitude over society, known more for his reserve than conversation. Now he approached, his steel-gray eyes steady on the woman huddled with her child. Sarah raised her tear-streaked face. Bewildered, Ezra halted beside her. For an eternal moment, he remained silent. Then his voice came low, rough as gravel, slicing through the final whispers. "You belong at my hearth." The room held its breath. Some scoffed, others muttered, but none dared challenge the quiet certainty in his tone. He knelt and extended his weathered hand. Sarah hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his calloused grasp. He lifted her with gentle strength, steadying her as though she weighed nothing. The infant settled against her chest. Marcus sneered from his place, but his bluster wilted under Ezra's unwavering stare. Without another word, Ezra guided Sarah down the aisle, his arms solid around her shoulders. The chapel doors swung wide as desert wind rushed in, scattering candles and prayer books. Together they stepped into the blazing heat, leaving behind mockery, disgrace, and the wreckage of false promises, though Sarah's heart ached. The warmth of his presence whispered a truth she had never known. She walked no longer alone. Chapter 2. Sanctuary in the wilderness. The wasteland stretched endless and silent as Ezra guided his Mustang across the hard pan. Night wind cut sharp against them. Behind him, Sarah held her child close, her dress still damp from desert storms. Her cheek pressed to the rough cotton of his shirt. She knew little of this man, only his name, Ezra Stone, a wrangler of few words who kept his own counsel. Yet she rode with him now, her baby clutched to her heart. Each hoofbeat carrying her further from shame and ruin. Finally, a dwelling emerged from the darkness, a sturdy cabin of weathered pine, its roof patched, with tin corrals stretching toward livestock pens. It spoke not of wealth, but of honest labor and quiet endurance. Ezra dismounted, then turned to lift Sarah carefully down. Her legs trembled, but his steady grip anchored her. She opened her mouth, gratitude, explanation, something but silence. Claimed her words, he pushed open the door and gestured her inside. The room smelled of wood smoke and worn leather. A scarred table sat near the stone hearth. Mason jars lined rough shelves. A Winchester rested in the corner. Boots stood by the threshold. It was the home of a man who asked little from life save work and peace. Ezra hung her shawl to dry, struck a lucifer, and coaxed flames to life. Next, shadows danced across log walls. Without speaking, he retrieved a thick blanket from a cedar chest and laid it neatly on the narrow bed. Sarah lingered in the doorway with her child, bewilderment mixing with gratitude. Why would he offer this? Open his home when the town had. Cast her out, she watched as he crouched to set a coffee pot on the fire, then moved to secure a loose window frame so cold air wouldn't seep through. His movements were sure, patient, the rhythm of a man accustomed to mending what others might abandon. The baby fussed. Ezra glanced over, his hard features softening. He warmed a strip of flannel by the flames and handed it to her. The child, quieted, sinking into slumber. Sarah's throat constricted. She longed to speak, but only tears gathered. The silence wasn't cruel. It felt steady, like shelter after tempest. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. Her baby slept, and Sarah thought the night might hold peace. Then came the sounds, boots on packed earth. Angry voices cutting through quiet. Torchlight flickered against the windows. "Open up, Stone," a voice barked. "You're harboring her in. There, that harlot and her bastard don't belong under your roof." The baby stirred, crying again. Sarah clutched the infant close, her hands shaking. Fists pounded harder. "Bring her out. Let the town judge her properly. She'll corrupt you too, cowboy." The porch groaned under multiple footsteps. Curses bled through the walls, then a crash. The latch splintered and the door burst inward. A man lunged forward, reaching for the child. Sarah's scream pierced the night. Ezra moved like lightning. His Colt cleared leather, hammer cocked, barrel gleaming as a single shot cracked the darkness. The bullet tore skyward, echoing across the flats. The mob froze. Gunsmoke curled as Ezra leveled his gaze on them all, gray eyes cold as winter steel. "You touch her or the child," he said, voice low and deadly, "and I'll plant you in this ground." The lunging man stumbled backward, hands trembling. Mothers pulled children close. The boldest cursed under their breath, but none stepped forward. Sarah stood shaking, tears streaming. For the first time, someone had stood between her and the world, not for gold or gain, but to shield her. Her baby cried softly. She pressed her lips to its head, sobbing with relief. Ezra lowered his weapon, holstered it with calm finality, then pushed the broken door shut. The frame held. Inside the small cabin, the fire crackled on. Sarah clutched her child and looked at the man who had claimed nothing, demanded nothing, yet given her more than anyone else had dared. She had been abandoned. At chapel steps, cast aside by family, scorned by an entire community. But under this roof, with this silent cowboy, she and her child had found what she thought lost forever: protection, and perhaps, in the quiet strength of his presence, the fragile beginning of something more. Chapter 3. The Weight of Secrets Morning. Light bathed the desert in pale gold. Sarah woke with her baby pressed close, wrapped in the coarse wool blanket Ezra had provided. For the first time in weeks, her rest hadn't been broken by gears or cold stone cells, but by the gentle scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. She rose slowly, her body weak, but her spirit restless. The small cabin felt strange yet safe. She wanted to prove she wasn't merely a burden, not just a woman hiding behind another's strength, with unsteady hands. She gathered water, scrubbed a shirt, and tried to prepare a meal from the meager supplies. On the shelf, When Ezra returned from the horse pen, dust coating his boots, the table held cornbread and beans. Sarah waited nervously, smoothing her child's fine hair with her fingers. "You should rest," he said quietly, his eyes taking in both the dishes and her pale face. "I wanted to contribute," she whispered. He didn't argue. Instead, he placed a folded piece of paper by her bowl. She glanced down, reading words in rough, careful script. "Rest comes first. The work waits." Her throat tightened. He could have ordered her back to bed. Instead, he preserved her dignity. That night, the baby's wails shattered the quiet. Exhausted, Sarah rocked the infant, whispering comfort, but the cries only intensified. Her arms sagged with fatigue. Then Ezra filled the doorway. Without a word, stepped forward, lifting the child from her trembling arms. "Sleep," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the infant. He settled by the hearth, large scarred hands cradling the baby with surprising tenderness. Then he hummed low and steady a rough melody, born of lonely nights under endless stars. The tune threaded through the room, patient and sure, until the child's sobs softened into silence. Sarah sat on the bed, her heart quaking. She had never seen a man so gentle, never felt hope flutter so dangerously close to her grief. In the days that followed, Ezra's silence became its own language. One morning, he returned from the barn with a small tin pail, setting it on the table. "Goat's milk," he said simply. The baby drank eagerly. Relief flooded Sarah's chest, though her thanks caught in her throat. He only touched his hat before returning to his chores. Later, while folding laundry, she noticed her dress laid carefully. On a chair, the torn sleeve had been mended clumsy, uneven stitches, yet thoughtfully done. She traced the lines of thread, eyes stinging. His hands were built for rope and reins, not needles. Yet he had tried. She pressed the dress to her chest, moved beyond words. Her thoughts drifted to the life she had left. She remembered her parents' weary faces, the cracks in their hands, the desperation hanging over their cabin like storm clouds. Debt had strangled them. Hunger gnawed daily. When Marcus, the wealthy baron, offered marriage, it was less proposal than bargain. She had agreed, burying her love, her secret. Standing at the altar so her family might survive, she believed she could endure anything. But when her baby's cry betrayed her secret, when Marcus's fury turned the bargain to ash, she had been left, with nothing but disgrace. Now, in a stranger's home, she held proof of something else. Goat's milk offered without words, stitches sewn by clumsy hands. A lullaby that soothed her child. She pressed her lips to her baby's hair and let herself breathe. For the first time since the chapel steps, she wasn't merely surviving. She was being cared for, and though silence still stretched between her and Ezra, it was no longer empty. It was filling with meaning words could never hold. Chapter 4. Shadows of the past, the desert night, lay heavy around the cabin. Wind rattling shutters. With mournful cries, the fire in the hearth had sunk to embers. Casting faint red light across the room, Sarah stirred in her sleep, sweat beading her brow, arms wrapped tight around her child. Ezra sat in his chair by the window, hat pulled low, rifle across his knees. Sleep rarely found him. He listened instead to the wind, to the cabin's creaks, to the soft rhythm of breathing. Then came the sound that chilled him, not coyotes or restless horses, but the broken murmur of a woman trapped in nightmares. "No, James, don't. The land, ... blood everywhere, ... Her voice cracked into sobs. Ezra's jaw tightened. The name James hung in the air like smoke. Sarah clutched the child tighter. Even in sleep, he sat still until dawn light paled the horizon. Then he rose, his decision made. When Sarah woke, her baby cooed softly beside her. She blinked, then saw Ezra at the table, shoulders squared. He poured water into a tin cup without looking at her. "You called a name last night," he said, "Sarah?" "Froze, James," Ezra answered evenly. "You spoke of land, of blood. Who was he?" her throat closed. For long moments she sat silent, clutching her child. His voice cut again, low but relentless. "Tell me the truth." Her shoulders sagged. The secret weighed too heavy to carry. "James was the man I loved," she whispered. "A ranch hand, poor but kind. We dreamed of a spread, a life carved from nothing. He fought to claim land with his own." Sweat. Her voice broke. "But Marcus wanted that land too. He tried to buy it." James refused. Then came the nightmen with guns, shots that cut him down. They called it a dispute. I knew whose money paid them. Tears streamed down her cheeks. When my parents learned of the child, they panicked. James gone, debts crushing us. Offered marriage, money enough to save them. They begged me. Think of the family. So I did. I hid my baby. I walked to that altar, ready to trade my love, my soul for survival. But when my child cried, the truth spilled out, and Marcus cast me away like dirt. Silence pressed the room. Ezra's hand clenched on the tin cup until it groaned. He turned, eyes shadowed by storm. "My partner," he said at last, voice low as gravel. "He wanted land too, a piece near the creek." Merchants came with papers signed by sheriffs who never saw the soil. When my partner stood against them, they put him in the ground and called it justice. He set the cup down hard. The men behind it walked free. Men like Marcus. Sarah trembled. "I'm sorry. I should never have," but Ezra cut her off. His gaze fixed beyond her on the horizon. Pulled a saddle strap tight, leather creaking under. His fists were not finished with him. Sarah's breath caught. There was no comfort in his tone, no promise of safety, only a vow carved from grief. The baby stirred, fussing softly. Sarah bent to hush it, tears dampening its hair. Ezra didn't step closer, didn't soften his voice. But the set of his shoulders told her one thing. The secret was no longer hers alone. Chapter 5. When vengeance comes, calling the sun dipped low, casting the homestead in long shadows. The air was too still, too heavy. Esrad noticed hoofprints, earlier faint tracks across the dry earth, but said nothing. His rifle rested near the door as he worked silently on a bridle. Sarah fed the baby near the hearth, her hands trembling. Though she couldn't say why, something whispered of danger. The first shot shattered the quiet. Glass exploded from the window, shards scattering across the floor. "Down!" Ezra barked, pulling Sarah and the baby to the ground as another bullet thudded. Into the wall, voices roared outside. "Come out, Stone. Hand over the woman, and maybe we'll let you see another sunrise." Marcus's men? Ezra's jaw set, grabbed his rifle, kicked open the door, and fired. One man fell screaming into the dust. Gunfire erupted. Men surged from behind. Rocks and posts, bullets tearing into the walls. Ezra moved with deadly precision, each step calculated. He fired from the doorway, the water trough, the barn. One by one, attackers dropped, yet more pressed closer. Inside, Sarah huddled with her baby, whispering prayers over the roar of gunfire. Then the door burst open. A wild-eyed man lunged inside, blade flashing, his gaze fixed on the child. "No." Sarah screamed, throwing herself in front of the cradle. Ezra was faster. He hurled himself across the room, snatching the baby and pulling it to his chest. His broad back shielded the infant as the knife slashed down, ripping fabric but sparing flesh. Ezra twisted, revolver flashing twice. The attacker crumpled, blade. Clattering across the floor, the room fell silent, but for the baby's cries. Ezra knelt in the fire's glow. The child pressed against him, his gray eyes softening as he looked down at the tiny face. "Easy now," he murmured, rough but steady. "You're safe." Sarah froze, tears streaming. For the first time, she saw beyond the silent cowboy. She saw a man who carried death on his hip, yet held her child as though it were sacred. Outside, the remaining gunmen faltered. Shaken by their comrades' fate, they fled into the desert. Ezra didn't pursue. He stayed kneeling, stroking the baby's head until its sobs faded to quiet whimpers. When he returned the child, his hands lingered a moment longer than needed. "Sarah, clutched her baby, whispering, "You risked everything for us." He gave no answer. He only reloaded his revolver, jaw set, silence heavier than words. Later, after the bodies were dragged beyond the fence and the cabin patched as best possible, the fire burned low. Sarah lay restless on her bed. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ezra seated by the hearth, the baby cradled in his arms. He rocked the child gently, his scarred hand stroking its back. A low hum slipped from his lips, halting old, like a tune born under wide skies. Slowly, the child stilled, drifting into sleep. The sight struck Sarah harder than any bullet. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears glimmering. This man, who had spoken so little since the day he carried her from the chapel, now sat before the fire, humming her child to peace. Her heart shifted. Mid blood and terror, something fragile and undeniable had taken root. For the first time, she didn't feel cursed. She felt safe, because Ezra Stone had chosen without words to stand between her and the world. And as firelight painted him in golden shadow, Sarah knew her heart had begun to stir, dangerous and tender, toward the silent cowboy who had whispered her salvation. Chapter 6. The test of loyalty. The desert night was still, fire crackling low in the circle of stones. The air smelled of sage and smoke, heavy after the chaos of recent days. Ezra sat with his back to a fence post, one boot stretched toward the fire, rifle within reach. Beside him, Sarah fed the baby, its small hands clutching her dress as if holding on to life itself. It had been days since the attack, but echoes of gunfire still haunted her chest. She had barely begun to breathe again when another shadow crossed their fragile peace. The sound of hooves came first, steady and unhurried. Ezra rose, hand brushing the colt at his hip. From the dark horizon emerged a lean, scarred figure who dismounted with the ease of a man too long in the saddle, Cole Brennan. Once he and Ezra had ridden the borderlands together, fighting rustlers, hunting outlaws, sharing whiskey under the stars. Ezra had once dragged him bleeding from a canyon no one else would have risked. Now Cole walked forward, boots crunching dirt. "It's been a long time, Stone," he said, voice like gravel. Ezra waited, silent. Cole lowered himself by the fire, his grin catching in the flames. "Heard stories about you pulling a woman and her bastard out of Bone Valley like some knight from a dime novel. Didn't believe it till now." Sarah stiffened, clutching the baby tighter. Ezra's steady glance told her to stay still. Cole chuckled. "You're harboring a fugitive. Marcus Hartwell put a bounty on her head. Rich enough to draw hunters from Phoenix clear to El Paso. We could split it, Ezra. One last ride together. You hand her over, we take the gold, and you'll never have to mend another fence post. Enough to buy a valley, build a herd big enough to blot out the horizon." The fire snapped. The desert went still. Sarah's breath caught. The words cut deep. She looked to Ezra, dreading his answer. He lowered his eyes to the tin cup in his hand, set it carefully on the dirt, metal thudding softly. His fingers brushed the grip of his revolver but didn't draw. When he lifted his gaze, his voice was quiet yet hard as iron. "I don't trade people. Not her, not the child. That ain't my kind of gold." Cole's grin faltered. For a moment, he searched Ezra's face for hesitation. All he found was unshakable calm. The fire popped again. The baby whimpered against Sarah's chest. At last Cole rose, brushing dust from his coat. "You always were a fool," he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. "One day, that kind of thinking will get you killed." Ezra didn't move. He only watched as Cole mounted and rode back into the dark. The sound of hooves faded until only the fire remained. For a long moment, no one spoke. The baby sighed and drifted back to sleep. Sarah's hand shook as she smoothed the blanket over her child. Finally, her voice broke, trembling. "Why? You could have had everything. Gold, land, safety." Ezra's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the flames. When he answered, the words were simple, but carried the weight of stone. "Because some things ain't for sale. Not life, not dignity." Sarah's eyes burned. She looked at him, this man who had dragged her from shame, shielded her child with his own body, and now turned away from fortune itself, rather than see her broken. In that moment, she Understood. Ezra Stone didn't protect her from pity or duty or some code of honor. He chose her, chose to stand, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The fire crackled on, sparks rising into the desert sky. Sarah pressed her child close, her tears falling silently. This time not from despair, but from the fragile truth that she was no longer alone. Chapter 7. Reckoning and Sacred. Halls the storm rolled over Bone Valley like a beast unleashed train pounding roofs, wind tearing shutters loose. Lightning split the sky, throwing the crooked town into bursts of white. Townspeople crowded into the chapel, its walls groaning under the gale. Lanterns flickered, trembling against the beams. At the center stood Marcus Hartwell, his fine coat, clinging to him, soaked through, but his voice cutting sharp above the storm. "She deceived us all," he roared. "Sarah Liar with another man's bastard in her arms, and Ezra Stone? He's no savior. It's a thief who stole her to claim land not his." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, suspicion rising like a second storm. Outside, Ezra stood in the rain, one hand on his horse, the other steadying Sarah as she clutched her child. The chapel loomed before them, the place of her ruin, and now her return. She met his eyes. He nodded. Together they stepped inside. The doors banged open, thunder cracking behind them. All eyes turned. Sarah, pale but unbroken child in her arms. Ezra, tall, silent, rain dripping from his hat. Marcus's face flushed red. There, the traitor himself, dragging his whore back into God's house. "You'll regret this, Stone." His hired men shifted, hands grazing their guns. Ezra's boots echoed as he stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "You left her at these steps, Marcus. I picked her up, not for gold, not for land, because no one deserves to be left in the dust with a crying child." The words rang like a bell. Whispers stirred louder. Doubt spread. Marcus's rage boiled. "You're a pretender, a killer playing righteous." His hand flew to his revolver, pointed it at Sarah, shouting, "You should have died in that gutter." Chaos erupted. Gasps, screams, feet shuffling. Sarah froze, clutching her baby. Ezra moved. He shoved Sarah and child behind the pulpit. Twisting as his revolver cleared leather, thunder roared with the crack of gunfire. Marcus shot first. The bullet grazed Ezra's side, tearing fabric. Ezra fired back, not at Marcus, but the beam behind him with splintered fragments exploding. Marcus stumbled, revolver flying from his grip, crashing to his knees. The chapel hushed, but for the raging storm outside. Marcus scrambled backward. Pale and gasping arrogance stripped away. His hired men froze, cowed by Ezra's glare. Ezra's voice was iron. "If any of you still believe his lies, stand with him. But if you've got eyes, you saw the man he is." The silence cracked. One by one, townspeople stirred. A woman who once drew water with Sarah laid a trembling hand on her shoulder. "I believe her," she whispered. Others followed. Men who had traded with her late father, neighbors once cold. Slowly, they crossed the room, standing between Sarah and Marcus. Marcus's face twisted. "You fools," he spat, scrambling to his feet. "You'll regret this." But no one moved. No one raised a hand in his defense. He staggered to the door, broken, vanishing into the storm. His reputation sank into the mud with each step. The chapel quieted. Rain hammered the roof, the storm raging beyond. Sarah wept freely, clutching her child, not from despair, but release. She turned to Ezra, bloodied and breathless. Revolver lowered, his eyes softened. He reached for her hand, his grip firm, grounding her. For the first time since she had been cast aside, the weight lifted. From her chest, the storm had broken, and with it, so had her chains of shame. Epilogue. Where love takes root, the storm that had torn through Bone Valley left the streets washed clean, as if the town itself sought to forget the ugliness it had harbored. For weeks, after that night, whispers still floated in doorways and around trading posts. Some muttered of scandal, of shame, of a woman who should never have returned, but others began to speak differently. They spoke of Marcus as he truly was: greedy, cowardly, a man who had twisted lies to seize land and gold. They spoke of Sarah not as the abandoned bride, but as the woman whom Ezra Stone, the silent cowboy, had shielded when no one else dared. Ezra never cared for their words, but he noticed how Sarah began to lift her head higher when she walked beside him, the child cradled against her. The weight she had carried for so long was no longer hers alone. At his homestead, life settled into quiet rhythm. Ezra sold off a portion of his cattle, the coins enough to buy lumber and tools. With his own hands, he raised stronger walls, mended the roof so rain would never again seep through, and built a small room with a window that caught morning light. It was for Sarah and her child. He never said as much, but she knew when she found the clean quilt folded at the foot of the cradle he had carved himself rough. Uneven, yet steady as the man who had shaped it. There were small moments woven into the fabric of their days. Ezra, showing her how to sit astride a horse, his hand firm at her waist as she trembled with nerves. His gruff patience as he taught her to guide the reins. His quiet pride when she laughed for the first time in months as the horse carried her across the pasture. On cold nights, sat by the fire long after she and the child had gone to sleep, feeding the flames, his eyes never leaving the small wooden cradle. More than once, Sarah woke to find him there at dawn, his broad frame bent with fatigue, but his gaze soft, as though he were guarding not just the child but something fragile in himself. One evening, after the baby had drifted into slumber, Sarah sat by the hearth, watching Ezra run a cloth across his weathered saddle. Her voice came quiet, almost lost to the crackle of the fire. "I was left at the chapel steps with nothing but shame," she whispered, "but you gave me a home." He paused, the cloth stilling in his hand. For a long moment, he didn't look at her. Then he set the saddle aside, his rough fingers brushing lightly across hers. His voice was low, steady. "Home ain't walls, Sarah," he said. "It's who you share the fire with." Her throat tightened. She turned her hand to catch his, holding it in the glow of firelight. For the first time, she believed the word home belonged to her. When spring came, the grassland stretched green beneath a sky washed clean of winter's storms. One morning, as the sun rose in a blaze of gold, Ezra stepped onto the porch with the child in his arms. Sarah stood beside him, her shawl drawn close, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The baby gurgled softly, reaching a tiny hand toward the light. Ezra's arms shifted protectively, and Sarah's hand slipped into his. Together they stood as dawn broke, fully 3 shadows cast long across the open fields. A woman once cast aside, a man who had built his life in silence, and a child who bound them. Together, not broken remnants, but a family born from ash, forged in fire, and steady as the land itself. As the morning sun bathed the prairie in gold, their shadows stretched across the open land, 3 figures standing where once there had been only loneliness and loss. Sarah, no longer the abandoned bride, but a woman who had found her strength. Ezra, no longer the silent cowboy alone with his ghosts, but a man who had chosen love over silence. And the child no longer a secret of shame, but the heart of a new beginning. In the West, where law was harsh and mercy rare, they had found something worth more than land, more than gold, a home built not of timber and stone, but of trust, sacrifice, and love. And as the horizon called them onward, their story lingered. A reminder that, even in the harshest of frontiers, love can still take root and grow.